Yes, you are.
Okay. I like my POIs to be offered verbally, so not in the chat. Sorry, we mistyped in the chat. So I'd like you to unmute and give your POIs. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. In today's world of internet connectivity and widespread use of media is so important in our lives. What will opening government do today? As Fox News, we will bring to you 3 unique benefits, all said in PM speech. And first, providing objectivity coming from the center-right. Second, we will benefit from the financial sustainability and sponsorships. And more importantly, the media as a third branch of government to provide balance. So let's first look at the first benefit of Fox News, providing objectivity from the center-right. We see from the info slide that Newsmax has a lot of racist comments, and we see that there are a lot of problems coming from the more radical right-wing sentiments of media outlets. But we recognize that being right-wing does not mean racism. We think that it means even more than that. It means nationalism. It means proper border control. It means controlled immigration above all. Of course, we recognize that with every radical stance, whether left or right, there's always going to be brief problems. Even with left-wing politics, very radical left-wingers are seen to be inconsistent in their stance. They don't listen to conservative views and they shut out other people's opinion. They forgo nationalism for globalization and don't really take into account the economic sense of things. So we see that even from the left, the very radical left, they also have problems. So we see that these problems coming from really radical sentiments and different wings of politics is not mutually exclusive at all. The radical left have their problems and the radical right have their problems. So what happens when Fox News comes into the picture? When Fox News comes into the picture, they actually provide
Point.
They actually provide a more center-right influence to counteract and balance out the radical right influence that we have seen from Newsmax today. Why is this important? Because we minimize the damage from the radical right-wing media, and we bring in this relative objectivity coming to the center-right coming from the center-right to dilute this really radical right-wing sentiments. So as Fox News, why are we in on this? We will benefit from the financial interest and therefore result in financial sustainability. We see from the info slide, ratings from competitors and right-wing radical media outlets like Newsmax are growing. And we see that ever so pertinently, we think we need a lot of sponsorships in this era. We think that media is especially important and is actually the backbone of society because now with internet connectivity and technology, people rely on the media to get information. So in order to produce quality information, we have an ever-growing need for sponsorships to churn out quality media to keep the American public informed. And I'll be explaining why it is so important for the American public to be informed later in my speech. Therefore, we think that it is in Fox News' financial interests to move from a center-right to a radical right-wing sentiment. We kill 2 birds with 1 stone. 1, we get both financial gain, and number 2, also help dilute the radical right-wing media released to the American public. Now, before I continue, I would like to take that point of information.
What do you think the dichotomy is between right and center-right in US spectrum?
Okay, I've already characterized you just now. So I will just repeat myself. So the dichotomy between the radical right and the center right is that the radical right, according to the information slide, is that the radical right is extreme, passes a lot of extreme comments. But then I flagged it out to you in my first and second minute that these problems do not only exist on the radical right-wing side. It also exists on the radical left-wing side. So we see that even if OO wants to highlight that there are so many problems in the radical right-wing, no thank you. There are so many problems in the radical right-wing politics. We also say this is not mutually exclusive. There are also problems in the radical left-wing side. So we don't think this is a problem that can be used to OO's advantage at all. So why is CG harping on the fact that Fox News is moving from center right to right? I've told you just now that we are going to dilute the far right and the radical right-wing sentiments, which are seen and perceived as racist from the American audience. And second, now I will move on to how it is Fox News' duty to give the American audience more information and recognize that actually Fox News has a very, very unique position in today's debate. Instead of being a traditionally radical right-wing news or media outlet, we actually move from the center right to the radical right. This means that Fox News does not carry any radical right sentiments in the first place. Instead, Fox News carries the center right sentiments instead. And we think that parties or media outlets in the center will be able to provide a more balanced and a more objective view. So let's analyze the media as the third branch of government to provide balance. We see that the US has a very unique way of governance. There are three branches of government. One, the government. Number two, the justice system. And number three, most uniquely, the media. We see that there is a very, very important has a very important part to play in the US governance system to provide balance. Like the justice system, acting as a check and balance for the administration, and administration also acting as a check and balance for justice system. And media acts the same way. So let's see. So in the past, we have seen Trump as president, and he was balanced out with far-left media and media criticizing and offering commentary on his policies from a far-left or a far-left view. So now, what do we have today? Now we have a Democrat president, a president from a left-wing party, and now it is only fair to balance out, or it's only fair to the American public to balance out this Democrat president, this left-wing party president with far-right media. Why? Because there's a Democrat president, there's a left-wing president, that the media has a far-left slant. And this is all the more why we need balance. Why is it important to have balance? One, it is important to have informed audience. And two, it is important for them to have a diversity of opinions. This actually upholds the American value of liberty and freedom of opinion. If information is controlled and monopolized by one party, like the left in this case, there is really, really no freedom of opinion. So after all I've said, why will this benefit Fox News, and why will Fox News be in on it on opening government? It is in their interest to voice the concerns of a particular group of people. Fox News will help campaign for the ideas that they believe in, and the ratings of Fox News will go up because people will feel like their voices are heard. Therefore, if you truly believe that Fox News will benefit, please go with opening gov.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Next speaker, Elo.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, setting my timer.
Sorry, Santo, I'll have timing, yeah?
What, Omar?
I will help timing by putting the timestamps on the chat.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. As Fox News, we want to strategically position ourselves, and we reject to be associated with far-right media. Within US has a very volatile and polarized political landscape, but the pendulum keeps on moving. It means that the polarization of whether the general public association of politics keeps on moving from going to left to the right and left to the right, and things like that. So we think being in the center right is the most sustainable and strategic position that has kept Fox News a prominent place in the US media landscape. We question the efficacy from opening government, right? Because essentially what they're saying is that this is a form of how we are going to follow general public perception of what is politics for them, and how this is going to be a most favorable positioning for Fox News. But the question is that how structural and systematic is the reason for Fox News to move to the far right positioning, right? Because we think right now, this debate needs to talk about business decision from Fox News as a media company, and in terms of how we will be able to match our market segmentation, right? We think right now the reason why Fox News has sustainable market penetration in the media landscape in the US is exactly because we are keeping a strategic positioning of center right, and that is a unique position that we would like to maintain. We think what happened in OAN and other far-right news rise is a temporary surge that is caused by the declining of Trumpism, and that is why a lot of people want to search for justification and validation that their political leaning is still relevant. But the moment that their social circle, the moment that their communities start leaving Trump, also with the rise of other center-right Republican politicians like Mitt Romney and Mike Pence, for example, we think this type of searching for validation and justification from far-right people is going to decrease, and that is also the moment that OAN and other far-right news outlets is going to decrease as well. We think right now it's not strategic because the momentum of Trumpism and far-right movement has become very irrelevant in the US media landscape, and we do not want to tap into that because it's in strategic timing for us to tap into those trends. Now, the stance from opening opposition is clear. We want to stick to our center-right ideology. So in our newsroom and agenda setting, we would like to keep our center-right ideology and leaning, right? Now, I'm going to fill the shoes that opening government failed to do, right? Which is differentiating and characterize what is the difference between far-right content and center-right content. Now, the key difference is subtlety. And for example, if they want to prove why economic protectionism is bad, are they using conspiracy or are they using credibility from center-right news anchor or reporter or politician, right? I think right now, what is center-right news outlet right now doing is basing their political leanings, like supporting conservative social ideas, for example, is by credibility, by inviting a lot of political figures in the country, for example. And we think we would like to keep that in place, right? Because that is what keeping the networking of our news outlet still intact, right? But second of all, the center-right news outlet is also opinion-based, but it's also have to have some degree of facts that is true, right? We think the difference with far-right news outlet is that they're just basing their news on conspiracy and perception that is commonly circulating around the society. And this is like most of them are blatant lie. For example, when there's a staff from DNC suddenly die in their apartment because of natural causes, because he had a heart attack, for example, OAN framed it as it is a political assassination from Clinton families, for example. They just really like to put a clickbaity and sensationalism, but it is a based on blatant lie. We think we do not want to be associated with incredible news outlet like that. And we also think that the last differences is in terms of how we like to keeping our political leaning on center right. We will do not want to use like blatant like in order to deliver our news. So we think what happened with Newsmax and OAN rise was a temporary trend that surged with the increasing like denial of a lot of Trump supporters. And this is what opening government like unable to discuss in the debate, right? Why this trend is going to be sustainable and why we need to like significantly change our news outlet leaning, right? Because it's a form of irreversible damage that the moment that you are tapping into a far right news and ideology, it's very hard to go back to center right. Why? Because right now it's very easy for you to be able to be attacked by center left, like the screen capture of your news, that how you are providing a blatant lie and conspiracy is going to be put, and that is going to diminish your credibility. And a lot of people, like people in center right, are not stupid, and most likely they'll understand that it is also a form of blatant lie. A lot of politicians will not want to go to your news again because they think that your news outlet is associated with blatant lie and incredibility. So a lot of politicians will reject to be your sources. A lot of news anchors do not want to be present in your TV anymore. So we think that this is a lot of pragmatic disadvantages that you are going to get, right? So we think right now, even with the rise of Mike Pence, which is a notable presence in Republican exactly fighting with Trump. We think that Trump relevance is decreasing, right? And we think there's no structural reason in terms of why this far-right movement is the strategic position that we have to tap into, right? But we think in terms of keeping the legitimacy of our news channels, right? As Fox News, it's within the interest for us to keep our credibility, and shifting to far-right news outlet will directly diminish that, exactly because the political pendulum and polarization that I've talked about. Now, I think we need to characterize, right, the type of news that you will have to support on opening government and closing government, like Trump getting more crazier day by day, like do not want to give concession speech when Biden wins, like supporting Trump racism in a blatant manner. I think that because of the pragmatic reason by Fox News, like the pure economic and business model decision, it's also more lucrative and profitable for Fox News to be center-right, because now in their side, it's harder to find meaningful and useful networking. Like as a news outlet, you aspire to have a strategic position, so you are able to tap into a lot of sources like politicians or communities that are located in center-right. I think this unique position is what we want to keep and maintain, and we do not want to be associated with a temporary trend that's just going to keep leading you to a more blunder position. We're very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Elo. Next speaker, DPM.
Hi, can I just check if I'm audible?
Yes, you are. For me, you are.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I prefer gender pronouns, he, they, them. I would prefer my POIs in the chat. Please do not unmute. Thank you very much. Give me a moment. Whoops, sorry. Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think generally the opposition doesn't understand how the media outlets work. So let's just have economics 101 or finance 101 or running any business 101, right? The main thing that we recognize businesses need is your flow of income. How do media outlets then actually get this flow of income? Look, their performance index is literally based on the kinds of viewership that they have, right? If I'm going to have like the vast amounts of viewership that the far-right news outlets currently have today, then naturally more people are going to advertise on my channel, more people are going to come to my channel, I'm going to get more funding to produce my shows, but more importantly, politicians would want to tap on my channel in order to reach out to a greater viewer base, right? So just pragmatically, that is essentially how media outlets work, right? So just don't, I'm just going to show you how does this actually fail in the entire opening opposition's case. But before I move on, just general, two big clashes in this debate right from the start. I think very easy to just flush out the opening opposition right from the get-go, right? So firstly, let's talk about the principle as to why should Fox News actually become far right, right? So now let's take a look. The only argument coming out from opening opposition as to principally why should that happen is because there's a decline in Trumpism. And so when people are searching for the justification of like their far-right views, they would go to these far-right cable channels, Newsmax and OANN. I think the problem with this, right, and they say that, like, you know, there's this pendulum effect where only in the current status quo, that's why more people are flocking there. Once it dies out, then people will remove. So let's just understand how does the political scene work. I think Hannah did a great job in Prime Minister telling you how exactly the media or the general conversation and the discourse that's happening in the US actually looks like now, right? Given that it's controlled by a very democratic president now, a generally democratic government, we recognize that the spheres of conversations are flooded with liberal ideas, right? To the extent where it's extremely far left, to the extent whereby it's essentially shutting out the kinds of right wing or shutting out even like any right ideology that's coming out in the social platform. We recognize, therefore, that it's principally just for Fox News to essentially take a greater to essentially lean greater towards the far right end of the political spectrum, because that is where they are now able to push for the kinds of ideas, right? We recognize that it's the kinds of virality in those in those conversations that's able to actually spark up debate and spark up conversations within the US political sphere. We recognize that this is the unique benefit that they on the opposition is going to miss out. Because look, at a point at which the status quo is that people don't actually watch Fox News, given that its viewer ratings are like plummeting in the recent times as it loses its grip on American conservative audiences, we recognize that the power of Fox News doesn't actually stand. Therefore, every single benefit that they tell you about any like center-right political ideas cannot accrue to their side because there's literally just not an audience that actually wants to get there, right? We recognize that ultimately, if the center-right audiences can see the shift in Fox News and therefore at worst leave and stop watching Fox News, but at best they are able to like follow Fox News as it goes towards the far right and therefore push for the proper understanding of these kinds of far right like political ideas. Recognize that there is something that is beneficial, and that is how Fox News, as a conservative news network, is able to create some form of change in the political sphere. Remember, media outlets are there to, one, of course, get like financially profit from it, but two, essentially further the kinds of political ideas that these kinds of news networks stand for, right? That is how politicians actually go to them to campaign, go to them to use those platforms to campaign and push forward their policy ideas, right? Second of all, then, the whole general idea that that far right, like the difference between center right and far right is subtlety. First, we don't see how like that is essentially the difference. I think like both are either credible or not credible. I think even like if we look at Fox News in and of itself now, there's a lot of like uncredible news coming out from it anyway. So whether they go even further right and be more uncredible, like that's just not going to make a difference, right? Their target audience is conservative and it's just going to like get more viewership. That's something in and of itself is good for Fox News. But even if we recognize that there's some bad in fundamentally having like fake news coming out, we recognize that ultimately, one, there are fact-checking like mechanisms in place to ensure that those don't happen. But two, even if we recognize that these fact-checking mechanisms fail, there's literally no delta because like either way, they are already currently like spreading like non-credible facts and information, right? So there's literally no change that's going to happen to Fox News. Don't buy into whatever benefits that like the opening opposition tries to tell you. Then they tell you that like ultimately, and then they tell you that therefore ultimately the center right politicians won't go to Fox News and like and get them to campaign on their platforms. I think this generally in and of itself is like literally same thing, right? No harm. Like first and foremost, these center right like politicians wouldn't stay center right because they are just not going to get elected anyway and not going to get their ideas heard simply because of the flood towards the far right, right? We think that ultimately looking at the rise of Newsmax and OANN, there is a slant towards the far right, far right conservative audiences. To that end, we recognize that these are the incredible, this is the change that Fox News needs to tap on, and until now, no POIs from opening opposition. So we clearly take them in their entire case. But ultimately, right, what is this debate finally about? This debate is about Fox News. Recognize that Fox News in and of itself as a news media channel needs to be something that is sustainable financially in order for them to further the kinds of like political ideals, further the kinds of political stances that they want to push for. At the point at which we recognize that at the point at which we recognize that they are losing their viewer base, that is the kinds of things that they're going to move away. The only problematic or the only potential pragmatic argument that we saw from the opening opposition team is that like these views are like a pendulum, right? It swings between the far right and the conservative and the center right. So first and foremost, we recognize that news media like constantly fluctuates between this spectrum, and therefore in this motion itself we recognize it is something that Fox News can do by shifting away from its predominantly center-right broadcasting news focus to something that's far right at this point of time. We recognize that Joe Biden is still going to be president for the next 4 years. At the very least, nothing changes, but at the most, what they at least can do is start to put in more people into the House of Reps and into the Senate, right? We think that this is the kinds of change that moving towards a far right conservative audience can, one, capture the kinds of mass, and two, able to actually put their information or put their political ideologies out in the forefront because it is radical, it is viral, and that is how they get the viewer space. So proud to stand in opening government.
Thanks so much, DPM. Next speaker, DLO.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
PI presenters, just unmute yourself. But if either you or your teammate have been refused, just wait, give interval like 30 seconds. Don't heckle. Right? I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I believe that opening government understands neither the political spectrum of the United States, nor do they read anything beyond the context slide. Here's the substance of political spectrum in the United States that I asked it. When you're talking about United States, you need to recognize that the spectrum is kind of tilted to the right, the Overton window, so-called, which means that the nationalism, like strict border policy, is something that almost unanimously supported. Even the high fence was formulated during Obama presidency. Support towards ICE is massive, even towards a certain politicians on Democratic side. That's what we're talking about. So the corollary to that is that the substance that you need to defend on GovBench is a rather conspiratorial text, just like the reason behind OAN search during last year happens because of that, because they supported Trump while Fox News didn't. And that's the substance that's massively important in this case. Let me tell you this story and the context that apparently opening government never read about. When you're talking about the search in December, that happened in the aftermath of the election. Why? Because Fox News called many states for Biden, while Trump refused to acknowledge and even to give concession speech. That happened in the aftermath of Trump giving many conspiratorial takes on the voter fraud regarding mail-in ballots, for example, ladies and gentlemen. That's what Fox News didn't support, and that's what OAN supported at the end, or at that point, which means that the fame came because some Trumpists moved their or changed the channel from Fox to OANN. However, the point that, it's just short-lived, I'm going to demystify that, just like I demystify the point about the substance that they need to defend. I'm going to tell you about two things. No thanks. I'm going to tell you about the momentum, why it's already on a decline in terms of the Trumpist and far-right ideology in US spectrum. Second, I'm going to talk about the importance to remain on the center-right. First, let's talk about the momentum. This is the only extent that they defend because, well, you saw the search. Why don't you capitalize on it? That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous, given the fact that I don't think like they understand the context in this case. It's not just, well, the OO's argument is just the pendulum will shift back. It's already shifting back. Let me tell you the context. For example, ladies and gentlemen, the Romney getting second in recent poll in terms of favorability from GOP candidates. Also, if you understand, Donald Trump made a website that kind of similar in terms of layout to Twitter. Nobody retweets him there. Nobody visits to the extent that the entire website gets abandoned. That's how terrible the situation is for him. Nobody remembers him anymore, ladies and gentlemen. The Pence and Trump's pet, Mike Pence, recently came out and said that the case in Capitol riot, which also wasn't supported by Fox News, by the way, the conspiratorial stuff that Trump supported and propagate to the extent that Capitol have had that very massive riot. Pence said that it would be an irreconcilable position that he and Trump will always have. Why is this important? This shows to you that Trump is losing momentum, the Trumpists and far-right is losing momentum, and Mike Pence, which was very pivotal to capture the evangelical Christians, the reasonable Christians' right towards Trumpists, is no longer supporting Trump anymore. Even Trump also came out and said that he would reconsider Pence to be his running mate in 2024, which also signifies to you that he doesn't believe in Pence anymore, which means that the ties between Trump, between the extreme right and the evangelical Christians is almost completely cut off today. The momentum is not that, said it will shift back. It already is shifting back to the center right. You know, if you only read that it gets higher rating than Fox then in December, it doesn't now. It's not going to in a sustainable period of time. So that's what the momentum that I'm talking about. And I don't think they analyzed that properly, because even if you assume that the rating was high in December, what made them believe that it would still be there, given that Trump is banned from Twitter or banned from Facebook for 2 years? He is also banned from Twitter, essentially. And also, like, there's this notice that the claim is disputed, etc. You know, nobody accepts him, even in social media realm anymore. He's not as influential. The center-right politicians disassociates with him, Mike Pence, Mitt Romney, even John Kasich, and who's the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, also disassociates with him. Before I proceed, any point from closing?
Yeah, so I'm really confused. Is your case as what you're first mentioned, which is that we want to be objective and not lie to people? Or is it the second case in which we want to co-opt like a kind of like evangelical Christianism?
No. We are talking about evangelical Christianism as a point. We are talking about it as a momentum analysis, that the Trumpist point, which became the reason why those news outlets get high rating last year, would not be present anymore. So that's the reason why nobody's going to watch, and Trump is not going to be Trumpist is not going to be a sustainable market share for Fox News at the end. This is the reason why it's incredibly important to remain in a center-right in US spectrum. One, because you can still maintain a certain degree of credibility and legitimacy. News anchors like Chris Wallace is highly respectable by both Democrats and Republicans. Even by Democrats, Chris Wallace is relatively respected. Megyn Kelly, although she resigned, kind of respectable for both sides across the aisles. It means that the legitimacy and credibility of Fox News as an outlet remains. The alternative is you undergo this conspiratorial takes, the rabbit hole. The Capitol riot is incited by the Illuminati, by the Freemasons, to incite Trump's presidency. That Mike Pence was able to override the result of elections because he was the election oversight committee chief, for example. That was the conspiratorial takes and the rabbit holes they needed to defend on their side. The non-credible, people on Twitter can say and tweet anything about it. There is no legitimacy in terms of the journalism scores out of the journalists that you hire. The second reason why this point is important is because the discussion in the right would be better off should there be a massive propaganda media like that. Should the normalcy be intact, that people can still believe towards the news cycle. There might be some op-ed Carson Tucker, for example, but that op-ed would still be honest. The third reason is the networking. Politicians wouldn't want to associate with you if you undergo these conspiratorial takes. I think that's rather clear that access and networking is massively important for news outlets. For those reasons, we oppose.
Thanks very much, Diallo. Next speaker, member of government.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Awesome. If you want a POI, just unmute and just don't do it too. No, actually, if you want a POI, do it through chat. If I don't say anything, that means I'm not taking it. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I love how Diallo conveniently pushes for a gov to defend transforming Fox News into a conspiratorial platform, because this is something that CG is happy to take up. This is a burden that we're happy to defend. We want to defend conspiratorial reporting. 2 pieces of setup before argumentation. Number 1 is that I'll properly distinguish center-right and far-right reporting. Ideologically, we're quite similar. Far-right, obviously more radical, but the pivotal difference is, you're right, it is riddled with conspiracy theory. That instead of saying corporations shouldn't be taxed in the name of checking back against climate change, you say climate change is a hoax altogether. And maybe China has something to do with that hoax. That instead of saying be careful with modern day medicine, you say that vaccines contain tracking devices from the government and are a means to control us as human beings. CG understands the possible consequence of spotlighting far more conspiracy theories and the types of views and reporting. We could spiral into a tabloid and ridicule ourselves. I don't care, whatever. Because ultimately, there are ideological foundations that are only conveyed through conspiracy theories as well. And that is ready to resonate with American population. I'll talk more about this later and why that's a good thing. But ultimately, right, second piece of setup is that viewership does not mean shifting ideologies of a country, right? You don't need people to agree with you in order to view you. If it becomes sensationalist media, and we're perfectly fine with that. I'll explain in detail why people consume media for all sorts of reasons, right? Operating basically as a corporation and a news source, we do not have an obligation to any ideological ties, which means that we don't have an obligation to something as abstract and arbitrary as things like objective reporting or things like correct reporting, right? All we want is to drive up fame and viewership to the extent that maybe obtain more corporate sponsorship as well, which is only possible when you get a lot of viewers, right? The only thing we got from OO is that it will be seen as a blatant lie. I don't care if it's seen as a blatant lie. Honestly, presenting something this fresh and new would be golden in driving up viewers. Extension that. That being said, the only argument in this debate that matters is viewership. OG brought this. I'll bring this in more detail. 6 reasons why this brings up more viewership. Number 1 is that American moderates will be on our side. I'm talking about Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden supporters, stuff like that. that. The vast majority of the American public, and probably fitting into this, are also those who with confused party ideologies, right? I.e. Republicans for Biden or Democrats for Trump or whatever counter American politics these days have pulled, right? The point is that American moderates are those who aren't sure which way to side. A key defining factor defining American moderates is that they are largely driven by a sense of extreme panic, and we would uniquely tap into this panic by airing out a lot of conspiracy theories and labeling them as news. No matter how believable, it's the populations who are panicking, who don't know if their next stimulus checks will come through, who don't know if there will be another government shutdown in 2 weeks' time, who would largely tap into this rhetoric and conspiracy rhetoric, and maybe COVID isn't maybe COVID isn't deathly, and a good portion might be largely made up. Like you'll drive up this viewership from American moderates, especially in the middle of a pandemic when the economy's crashed. These are also the very populations who might be skeptical of the vaccines produced by Bill Gates, who would need to entertain a lot of skeptical views of what ought to and on what you ought not to do, right? It is why the very anti-vax far-right media are getting a lot of clout right now, exactly because they fuel the skepticism that provides a fresh perspective to these American moderates. Secondly, our far-right, center-right population, I'm going to call them like more rational Republicans, right? Quote unquote rational. Those who are probably think Ben Shapiro is king, who says Trump is not a proper representation of the Republican Party, and those who say that the Republican Party is better represented by Abraham Lincoln or whatever, right? The defining factor of these conservative groups is that they're largely driven by family values and affiliation. Those center-right people who are probably have connections to like the Kennedy line or the Kennedy family or stuff like that. Those people are right now shifting to like center Democrat platforms, like supporters of Nancy Pelosi. Those pseudo-democratic values that sort of entrench a view of American whites in the 1900s and ensue a sense of nostalgia of what it was back in the day. The thing with driving up conspiracy theories and entertaining that others would feel is what others will feel is something that would co-opt these populations, because theories like government is placing up a lot of devices in your homes and are out to infringe on your privacy actually drives up a sense of nostalgia, because an emblem of far-right media skepticism and conspiracies is that it's largely skeptical of modernistic government, that a lot of the modernistic devices and technology and sciences are constructed and not inherently true. This skepticism is largely what drives up conspiracy, and sometimes what drives out the conspiracy and what makes people look back to the olden days and say the old government is a lot better, right? To say the good old days, like the days of FDR and Kennedy, are a lot better before it was all ruined by Nixon's Watergate debacle, right? So when Fox News emphasized on the far-right ideology riddled with conspiracy theories, the sense of nostalgia will co-opt center-right populations who look to the good old days and say, maybe there is something in common, maybe there is something going on here in Fox News. Thirdly, our leftist viewerships. Yes, you heard right. I know this sounds ridiculous. I promise you it makes sense. Believe it or not, leftists do a lot of research on conspiracists, right? Specifically right-wing conspiracists, of Holocaust deniers, of climate change deniers, of anti-vaxxers, because these populations and news stories are so out of the realm of leftist viewers that it drives curiosity. You have no idea how many leftist podcasts I've heard or articles I've read specifically that taps into the far-right conspiracists and analyzing their psychology, their reasoning for lashing out to such a radical extent against the American government to see the source of what leftists perceive a ridiculous level of ignorance and anti-science. This is good because leftists not only view this as personal research purposes, they're also a lot more sympathetic actually to far-right conspiracists than they are to center-right, right? They're way more likely to want to listen to the likes of Rudy Giuliani and how far off and ridiculous his ideology is, rather than seemingly educated figures like Ben Shapiro, probably emblematic of center-right, right? Who seems very reasonable to society. Leftists are sympathetic because at this point, this degree of ignorance is driven by a sense of government and social failure far more than the individual, right? Leftists are far more able to blame a society that is unable to garner a sense of awareness to the extent that the largest right-wing source in the country have shifted to deny science and opted for ignorance, which honestly makes them far more aligned with leftist ideology and society structures are corrupting man. You uniquely get a lot more leftist viewership because they want to learn from your media sources. And how is it you get to the points that you got? Fourth is libs and dens. It is so incredibly easy to solely reference far-right conspiracies as a means to prop yourself up in whatever next debate, presidential debate, right? Or for small-time congressmen, especially. We look to Democrats like Klobuchar, who entertain these conspiracy theories because very simply said, it's much easier to refute. It's much easier to prop yourself up and make yourself look good as a Democrat or a liberal if you reference these types of news media and make them seem like the entirety of the Republican Party. These Democrats sure might garner a lot of people to believe them. That doesn't matter because it still garners up viewership for you because people are curious to see what it is they're referencing. But at the same time, I don't think really everyone will side to these Democrats, right? Because they're notorious. Those people are also desperate to quote unquote destroy the right-wing parties, right? If anything, more people will probably be more spiteful disrespectful and hateful towards the Democrats to the extent that whatever they are referencing and trying or attempting to refute will probably drive more people towards your side. Fifth, our right-wing populace, uniquely different than radicals. This is exactly how Trump won. That drove up conspiracy about poor populations and your suffering, because people have not heard any information that was adequate enough to fix their problem. Desperate people, desperate secluded populations are far more likely to want to believe and want to read into new theories that are called quote-unquote conspiracy theories, because if anything, that's new because the decades of rhetoric that politicians have been spewing out have not worked for them. Vote CG.
Thanks, Member of Government. Next speaker, Member of Op. Yes, CO, can you please confirm whether or not you're consented to be recorded and live streamed? Live stream, yeah, Fahri, even. Okay. Where is CO?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you can, but before that, can I ask for your consent to be live streamed?
Yeah, that's fine with us.
Okay. With both of you, yeah? Just to be clear.
Sarvagya?
With both of you?
Yeah,
Both
just
of us.
fine with both of us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. You may proceed to your speech.
Sure, thank you. Let me just quickly set up my timer and then I'll begin within 10 seconds. Oh, just give me a second. Oh my God. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Panel, the way I'm going to structure this, my speech, is in the following manner. First, I'll tell you why CG, first I'll tell you why what CG is saying is absolutely not going to happen, and there's just blatant lies in what they're saying in terms of like the conspiracy theory and whatnot. I'm going to tell you by like structural mechanism as to how that is not going to happen in the first place. Second, OG is out of this debate for the following reasons that I'm going to give you further in my speech, and how is it that I'm going to extend from opening opposition in this debate, right? So starting with some closing, like some extraneous rebuttals to closing government first. One, that they say that we don't really care about whether this is a blatant lie or not. Their case is extremely contingent on the idea that they want to go ahead and propagate conspiracy theories in the first place. They say that they don't care this is a lie. This is principally abhorrent to this idea of American dream and the American values that you are living in for the status quo, right? And I'm going to tell you why this is important from like, I completely understand this is an actor debate and why that's important in the first place, right? So you being the Fox News, it is extremely principally important for you to actually uphold the American dream, just to become like, just to come out as palatable to the American people, to American like media, like American individuals and whatnot, right? Given all of that, I'll take your PY in the last minute. Secondarily, when they say that they want to increase the viewership in terms of like one, them saying that moderates will actually like be driven to their side of the house just by like they will be driven by panic and whatnot. I think this is extremely simplistic analysis of what moderates look like and who they are in the first place. We do not think and we categorically deny that moderate will be like just pumped up by panic, and just because like a lot of like there's a flurry of like let's say conspiracy theories, we don't understand why the flurry of conspiracy theories coming only from Fox News will not be catcalled, and people will not actually deny and people will not actually will actually decrease their viewership when they see that there's a lot of like propaganda coming from Fox News. We fail to understand that, and CG doesn't like give us a mechanism as to why that is going to happen. Secondarily, they say that they need a fresh perspective, and that fresh perspective somehow is going to come about as a result when they like move towards far right. That's also something very extremely simplistic. We do not know as to how that is going to happen for the following reasons. One, that they say that they want to have a fresh perspective. One, that there's nothing fresh in like far right ideas. Far right ideas for the longest time has been about racist, casteist, and like sexist ideologies and whatnot, right? And if they say that if they want to actually go ahead and make these sort of ideas more palatable to the narrative, they want to give a structural mechanism as to why that is so important in the first place. And lastly, on the idea of leftist viewership, right? They say that there is there's so much already on there's so much research these leftist people are actually doing in terms of like right ideologies, and hence they will be more sympathetic towards let's say far right or like as opposed to the center right. We think that even if that we do not think that this is true, but even if at best in the best case scenario it was true, like these leftists, since there will be let's say more research coming from these leftists into these far right ideologies, this will make actually because since they want to characterize the current status quo as there's a flurry of liberal media or maybe liberal ideas floating around here and there, and hence there's a greater propensity of liberal people actually siding with the right viewership. We do not think that is going to happen for the following reasons. Like, one, that it needs to be this is extremely important, and it needs to be characterized once and for all, and this is only coming from closing off. Both the opening opposition to some extent tried to characterize what the current political spectrum of United States look like, but we don't think that they actually reached there for the following reasons. One, United States today is ever divided than never before. In the previous elections, United States has almost a 50% obviously not exactly 50%, but yes, very close to 50% divergence in terms of rightist and leftist ideology. In this sort of paradigm, wherein this sort of a narrative is actually being so promoted, wherein there is United States is so divided, we need some kind of a unifier. And we, from closing opposition, think that Fox News is the only only media outlet can actually come about as a unifier to this divided spectrum and the scope of United States for the following reasons. One, Fox News is actually the most watched channel on in the entire American landscape, right? And we think that because of this reason, Fox News actually has an incentive to come about as a more balanced approach, and we do not think that just by moving towards far right ideologies will actually make them do that in the first place. Secondarily, they want to Fox News as Fox News, they actually have an incentive to make to increase their viewership and whatnot. We think that we do not think and we do not condone any of CG's ideas that they want to propagate this viewership by the following reasons. Because one, that they want to actually retain their image of being an integrator as opposed to that of a uniter. Why? Because as already characterized in the opening half, there is a decline on Trumpism, there is a decline on far right ideologies. In that sort of a paradigm, wherein Fox News comes across as a more integrator and not that sort of a divider. As to why is that going to happen? Because on social media, this again an extension coming from closing off. On social media, there is a lot of people are actually calling out Fox News, and on different platforms there are communities wherein on Twitter, on Reddit and whatnot, there are actually communities wherein they are ridiculing this idea of Trumpism and far right ideology by neo-Nazism and neo-fascist slurs, right? And we think that given all that exists, Fox News has a greater responsibility to actually come out as more important in the first place. Before I move on, OG.
You said that America is divided than ever before, but that's why you need diversity of opinions that only Fox News can offer, because we are coming from the center right.
Fox News cannot the diversity of opinions that you are trying to propagate just by the virtue of Fox News. We do not think that simply that diversity is going to help America in the long run. We as Fox News, we want to make ourselves more sustainable for the long run. And why is that the case? In the longer run, wherein far right ideologies will be nowhere to be seen, what will Fox News do then? We think that at that point in time, it's extremely important for Fox News to actually come out as more responsible, to come out as more the image sort of an integrator, not that sort of a divider. Third, constructive in my speech today, Fox News has a sort of a slogan wherein they want to come across as fair and balanced and whatnot, right? They also have a reputed international recognition. They also want to pander to the audiences that are there across the world, right? So at that point in time, when they go ahead and make this sort of when they go ahead and make themselves and project themselves as far right, that is extremely detrimental to their international image as well, for the following reasons. One, that they lose their international audience. Second, they lose their principle just when they actually condone these kind of extremely racist and white supremacist views and sexist views, they are losing their principles as well. And lastly, on the idea that they want to propagate hate in society and not and they do not want to be seen as a flag bearer of it. And lastly, on the idea that they once they come back when all this all the stupidities Chinese want, what is it that they are trying to do? In the long run, we want Fox News to survive, and we do not think that more information and diversification of opinions just really means uniting the American landscape and actually coming across as more palatable. For all these reasons and many more, vote with CEO.
Thank you very much, member of OP. Next speaker, Government Whip.
Hi, am I audible?
Audible.
Okay, cool. POI through the chat or turn on your video. Do not unmute. Thank you. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I do not like CEO. There are 5 reasons why they lose. Number 1, abhorrence to the American dream is wrong, or like adherence to the American dream is wrong. Fox News don't need to care about moral ideology to it's just a company who cares about volume of viewers. I don't know why Fox News is a unifier of the American people. The reporter isn't the president and holds no moral obligation. That's the first reason why their case falls. Secondly, is because if the argument is to capture more viewers, CEO immediately loses, because I don't know why Fox News would have the social capital to shift their ideology to objectivity when the past 10 years has been always about disliking the Democrats and uplifting the Republicans, basically, right? So if anything, this means CEO gets less viewers because the existing skeptics will dislike you. The consensus would be that you are a corporatist and disattached to the American society. You get less viewers overall in CEO. Thirdly, moderates are pumped by panic and pumped by intuitions. If we're talking about the smartest moderates, they're more likely to be objective on both sides anyway because they read journals or whatever. The way we sway the vast majority of not super smart voters is by tapping into their intuitions, i.e. the fact that policies haven't been passed by certain presidents, for instance, politicians lying, big government, the leftist machine on democratic freedoms, etc., or against democratic freedoms. There is a wrong characterizations on CEO, which assumes that everyone is a smart individual, and also in OO. So I don't really know why they thought that was a good point, because the vast majority of individuals not read every single thing, and you are more likely to be able to sway them with intuition pumps, which we're able to do with the catchy headlines as well. Fourthly, we never said the liberals would side with Fox News. Like, come on, just listen to that member speech, right? What we told you is that you just obtain significantly more viewership and more volume of viewership every single time you release something, because it's just so much more catchy. Note, Fox News isn't the only news outlet that exists in the world. If people only want objectivity, you can go to literally every other outlet. The variability in demographics is an important consideration in this debate. Shame on OO and CEO for not understanding this. Fifthly, the point on international viewership is useless. They don't count to commission for Fox News. They don't get them any money. That just falls. Everything. All that just shows to you why CEO is just out of the debate. I don't really care about them anymore. 2 questions. Firstly, why is this consistent with Republican trajectories? And secondly, why do we get more viewership? Second question is probably more important. Firstly, why is this consistent with just the trajectory of the party overall? The premise here was simple, and what we told you in extension. Both the Republican Party and Fox News have been racing to new age ideology of right-wing politics, empowering white fragility and anger in order to tap into people's intuitions. Here's the strategy of the Republican Party. This was how the party curbed democratic corporatism at the point where they can't find out the lunacy of they can't point out the lunacy of Bernie anymore as a good strategy because he lost. We must point out the flaws of the Biden administration instead. The only way we do that is to tap into people's intuitions that dislike Biden, and for that reason, we're the Republican Party is more likely to get traction from that. That proves to you the structural reason for why the Republican Party is consistently still going towards the trajectory of conspiracies, which is why Fox News following suit would be very beneficial. 2 rebuttals against OO here. They said USA is polarized. It's not an obligation of Fox News to fix polarization. Moreover, it's strategic to tap into that polarization. I think OO gives us the social trend of American politics and the structural reason for why it is okay for us to tap into conspiracies, because that means more viewers will end up going to our side, or to Fox News in contrast to every other news outlet. Secondly, they told us politicians don't want to associate or network with you. 2 responses. Number 1, this is wrong because politicians want most amount of traction. The way you get that is to be interviewed by the biggest outlet currently and the largest reach, basically, and the one that has the most catchy headlines. So for all those reasons, their argument on this fails. But secondly, even if you don't buy that, you have to buy that politicians need to find a way to prove good policies. The way they do that is to intuition pump their policies. The only way to intuition pump this is to go to these platforms and attract the voters who would otherwise not really vote. How do you weigh all this? Firstly, whilst while this is not the most important thing in the debate, I think this was the opening deadlock, right? We explained why consistency with ideological trajectories is only important insofar as you mimic the direction of the Republican Party. What OG missed was the burden OO pushed, defensive conspiracies and pure commentaries. But 2, if you want to show the glory of Fox News overall, we gave you that in extension as well. We accessed that with our nostalgia point. The process of showing conspiracies and commentaries of currently bad presidents makes Republican history much more rich in the whole viewership or the whole way that you process it in your news outlet. If OO wants people to derive just like that legitimacy towards Fox News, we attach ourselves to the whole history of the Republican Party much easier. The only way to do that is to claim that you are the Republican image, and for that reason, we still capture a huge chunk of our ideology, a huge chunk of the sustainability point that they want. Thirdly, the benefit is just a better image for Fox News. I think that's quite clear as to why we win that. Secondly, though, on all the financing and all the stuff that opening government assert but do not actually explain, no thank you. Why does this obtain more viewership? The first reason I want to note here, and the reason why OO loses really incredibly, is because their first said we don't want to lie to people, but also second said they want to co-opt center-right politics without ever actually characterizing it. So I don't really know if Fox News wants to be Associated Press for some reason and become just like very objective, or they want to do something that like they haven't actually characterized, right? So the counterfactual makes no sense. The pathway to getting more viewers is non-existent in that case. They never even told us what center-right is. What we explained to you is that the characterization of rationality, Ben Shapiro, or even the nuclear family is what this looks like. It does not look like objectivity, and for that reason, you do not capture more people. Two rebuttals against this. No, thank you. The first was that the OANN only rose because of Trump's conspiracies. No, it rose because of Republican conspiracy overall. Trump isn't the only candidate or like the only person in the Republican Party. He obviously isn't the only figure of right-wing politics in the USA. But number two, the heavily just like circulation of skepticism isn't just due to Trump. It's also due to decades of politicians not fulfilling their promises, increased access to political just like landscapes across all demographics, etc. We show the structural reasons that OG couldn't give. And what this also proves to you is that if Trump was elected in 2016 and people continuously like that, it was not Trump that people liked as a person, just because like, I don't know, like the inherent likelihood, the inherent liking towards Trump. What people liked was that Trump tapped into their intuitions and dislike against the American political landscape overall. And so for that reason, it structurally proves why that viewership still sustained on our side of the house. Next, they said center-right is a sustainable politician, a sustainable position. This is wrong because the aspiration of objectivity is inexclusive to Fox News. Viewers of the demographic can go to Associated Press, MSNBC, and other state-based news like NY Times and just like Wall Street Journal, right? What this means is lower market capture on OO because if the conclusion is that they want to get like people to turn into objective news or people to turn to news that doesn't lie to them, those individuals do not want to go to Fox News anyway because of the history that they have also. So that means zero market capture on their side. But two, if what OO is talking about is center-right news, that's just really fucking boring. The 50s Fox News, a return to nuclear family aspirationalism, only got viewers because the vast majority of people at that time or watchers were white people who had the privilege of the American dream. Everyone else didn't. Today's society is different. Center-right news is likely to instead lose to corporate Democrats who portray a more stable image of democracy today. It is an unsustainable position because you're more likely to lose as a news outlet in contrast to even CNN, basically. How do you weigh all of this? Number one, we tap into different groups of voters, general social panic due to contextual reasons that only exist now that LO also gives to me, the inherent anger against all politicians. I think Fox News' primary incentive was to just get more viewers in total. This doesn't mean we need to get the same viewers, but rather consistently new viewers, even if they only come in to like dislike us like they just like leftists do. But number two, we win because if OO is correct that people are already disliking OAN and Newsmax, then people are more likely to go away from them and turn towards the seemingly most larger like Republican outlet, as we explained with nostalgia as well. Even if you don't buy any of our analysis on capturing moderates or leftists, ideologically like just like right-wing individuals are likely to need some just like way of fulfilling their like dislike against the Biden presidency as well. The way you do this is by co-opting conspiracies. All this proves to you CG's passing.
Thank you, Goffwip. Next and the last speaker, Opwip.
Am I audible?
Audible.
Yeah, just give me one minute. I'll just start my timer and check. Starting in 3, 2, 1, start. Become a joke, sensationalize media, and then just you are sustaining for a long time and gaining viewers. That's basically the CG's case, right? That you want to become a joke in front of people, and because that is sensationalism, that is the conspiracy theories that you want to propagate. and you believe that for very long period of time you're going to sustain over that and become a very, very loved outlet, gain viewers, and then going ahead and become, say, the largest news channel. No, right? You like a joke, say, once or twice. You do not like conspiracy theories being put into your face every moment of time, and that is what news channels are. That is what the news channels are not supposed to do. That is the basic idea of that Fox News has always stood up against. That's the basic idea of Fox News that Avi tells you has never been true, right? What has Fox News been historically and is currently is what Avi tells you, right? Fox News has always been produced as somewhat center right, but always upholding the values, right? That is why when they go ahead and say even criticize Trump for something, that is when they are praised and not gone ahead and then told that you're wrong, right? That's the idea of, say, Fox News being the biggest news channel in US and also having international reputation is something that is very, very valuable at this time. At this point of time to Fox News, and that is why we think that is something that Fox News is not ready to go ahead and say leave it out at this point of debate. So to just become an international joke that goes and propagates international conspiracy theories is something that we believe on CEO's side, something that we never understand as to why CG is going ahead and saying that is something that sustains over the long time, because we firmly believe that is something that does not. They go ahead and tell me that's a weird. They have this weird assumption that's a very sensational and only people only like to watch sensational media and say create when, say, panic is creating, and that is where Fox News will go ahead and say be in a better off situation. We do not believe so, right? We believe so that people to some extent might like it when they're probably looking for jokes or something, when probably the centrists and the leftists are looking at how stupid rightist people are. But they're not watching it, say, over and over again, right? That to understand the views. That is something that happens when you're center right? That is the idea behind these people when they want to actually go ahead and understand a different kind of view, not when you're, say, making jokes all the time. And understand also the problem regarding extreme right ideas that Avi has already told you, right? Extreme right ideas are always associated with the ideas of, say, conspiracy regarding racism, the increasing hate in the society in and of itself, and that is something that we believe that it cannot be sustained over a long period of time. So even though the current US is something that is polarized, we believe that is something that cannot be sustained over a long time, right? People are going to be go ahead and say unite. People will be united over time. That is what has happened over time, right? And we believe that the image you have at that point of time is something that stays with you for a longer period of time, right? And that is why you gain viewers. The image that you have, the image that any news channel has is something very valuable to them, right? And we believe exclusively, like we tell you at CEO, as to why the image that we produce, why the image that you have at this point of time is somewhat of a unifier when you go ahead and criticize the very stupid and dumb extremely right conspiracy theories, right? When you go ahead and criticize those and not support those, rather you stick to your ideals of, say, rather you stick towards your ideals that have been successful over the past. That is something that gains you viewers over time and, say, helps you sustain over a longer period of time. That is the only aim of Fox News, right? To sustain over a longer period of time, not to gain, say, some sensational sensational viewers for like 1 year and then become a complete joke and never sustain for a long period of time, right? Understand the very simplistic analysis that the state government is given, right? That a center right journalist is something that will somehow be stupid and cannot go ahead and gain viewers. That is not true, right? They also know how to go ahead and push news articles for themselves, and that is something that we believe is a very like weird assumption again from their side, which is not true in any scenario. Coming to say understanding the US geographics and, say, geopolitics at this point of time, right? Understand when people are getting united, and we believe that extremely right people who support extreme right are the ones who are extremely Trump supporters and, say, not the ideal Republican or, say, general American as well. We believe that when this is not sustained over time, when the younger generation is something that supports the left or probably supports the center, we believe that is the image that you want to have, right? When in 2021, when Biden is there, we believe that the idea of Democrats Democrats and leftist views rising will be better, right? And when you go ahead and push stupid news articles, that is something that will never gain you viewership, right? And at this point of time, it's important to understand this status quo and related at this point of time, right? Why is it important? Why is it important to not have say a very bad image, and rather have somewhat better and not cater to extreme right ideas? And coming to comparing to comparative analysis as to OG and CG at this point of time, right? Understand that what has OG's case been, right? OG's case was basically that we need to go ahead and be completely extremely right, because we want people to have all views at our objective point of view. And we want people to understand that even these ideas can be very objective and not very stupid, right? That's something that does not cater to the actor in this debate. And that is never the Fox News goals in and of itself, to go ahead and say just cater to these right wing ideas, but rather that is something that cannot be even done to some extent, because extreme right ideas will always be associated with the racism and all, because that is what the conspiracy theories in the end rely on. That is something that we believe is something that cannot be done. Understand that what else does the OG do, right? They tell me that it's important to dilute the right wing ideas, the conspiracy, when they have an objective view. Again, that is something that is again problematic. And they want to gain more sponsorship, but that is something that they never mechanize from their point of time. Coming to CG's case, I think when they go and that is something that we have already rebutted. Sensationalism is something that can't cater over time, and when you want sustenance over time, that is something that you cannot cater to. Rather going ahead and providing a mechanism to it is something that they lack, something that Avi has already told you in multiple ways that cannot be done. That cannot be done because people are going to go ahead and say, understand what you're doing at multiple times at this time. Why win over O though? Understand O's ideas has been like can be summarized in two ideas, two lines, right? They tell me that right wing is currently temporary, and say extreme right will lose credibility. Right? Yeah, fair enough, but they never provide you why is this important for Fox News, right? We tell you at this point of time why is it important for Fox News being an actor in this debate, and having this image is something that is very important to news outlets. So for all these reasons, very, very proud to oppose and vote CO.
Thanks very much, Opwip. Thanks everyone for the debate. Now please virtually cross floor, shake hands, and wait outside. Wait in the main room, because the judges are going to deliberate.